Yeah. It's interesting just to see, and not surprising, just to see the sadness of people as they come in there and look at it, you know, neighbors, people who've seen it for years. It just reminds us of the importance of trees.
Yeah. Oh, how sad.
So,
What type of tree was it?
well, it was an oak, and it had been proposed to us by Robin Haynes from the tree stewards. And she had determined, or I guess the tree steward had determined, that it was a kind of an unusual hybrid of a bur and a post oak.
Oh,
So
I think they changed their minds after they got somebody in the forestry department to look at it and decided it was just a post oak. They thought it was a hybrid between a bur oak and a post oak, but I think they settled on a post oak.
okay. So yeah, you can see part of it behind Mark.
yeah. I was admiring it at first. Oh, how sad.
By the way, Jody, while I have you here, I want to say I'm sorry again that we kind of lost you because we weren't keeping you in the loop as to our changed meeting dates. So sorry about that.
Well, that's all right. I just, it was causing some confusion because I still have it as a recurring meeting on my calendar, and it keeps coming up, and oh, tonight's tree commission, and I show up and whoops, no one here.
Well, I know you had said you couldn't make one of them. Oh, no, you missed one because it was a conflict because we changed our date. And that's
Yeah.
what sort of cut you off from our communications.
Exactly. So are we back on the, what is it, the first Tuesday of the month?
Yep, we're back to our schedule,
Okay, good.
and we'll stay here through the rest of this virtual purgatory, which I'm beginning to wonder if I'll ever see you all again. I saw Mike in the cemetery today. I said, you know, Mike, I've seen you twice in 18 months, and both times it's in person, and both times it's been in the cemetery. Peggy and I still need to meet. Peggy, you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm eating.
No, I was saying Peggy and I have yet to meet. I can't hear Peggy. I don't know if she's on mute. Well, I think I scared her off. So we're live. We're at the 5 o'clock hour. When Peggy joins us, we will have. There we are. Can you hear us, Peggy?
Oh, I can't hear anything.
Okay, we can hear you.
All right.
That's always dangerous. No telling what's going to come.
Oh, yeah. Can I change my background? Does anybody hear me? No.
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
I want to make you jealous and change my background. I don't know how to do it. All right.
But you can hear us now.
Yes. How do I change my background? Mark, you
I
can
don't
tell
know.
me.
You're kind of in the
You
dark.
have to
there.
go in the profile settings and then select the picture that you've saved somewhere that you know where it is. So it's
All right.
probably a little annoying to try to do it now.
Well, maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe you can find a good photo.
Oh, I can definitely find a good photo if I can only make it work.
There, you changed your lighting. You're much better lit now.
Yeah. Okay. Ah.
I'm a bit confused because I'm seeing two mics. Explanation, Mike Renee?
Yeah, this is the other, I sent Vic my Zoom invite. This is Vic Garber. This is our acting director
Oh,
for Parks and Rec.
Great. okay. I just,
I didn't notice that I was mic number 2, but it's a pleasure
You're
to meet
listed
you
as-
all.
good to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
You should get the option to rename yourself if you hover your mouse over your name. Give you that option.
You- I think I should do that. Mike said, please.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have several people who are either not able to join us or will be leaving early. So I think we should go ahead since we have our quorum. We'll call the October minutes meeting of the Charlesville Tree Commission to order. Typically, our first order of business to look at last month's minutes. We also have the minutes from July, which had some significant corrections, so they were sent back round. I don't see Jean is here with us just yet, but she did have a look and made some edits and returned them, which you received this afternoon. So we have two sets of minutes. Acknowledging that Tim had two corrections that I know Mike has for to correct his attendance at those two meetings. And so now I will just ask if there are any further corrections or amendments, et cetera, to either, let's start with the July minutes. Does anybody have anything they want further to add? I don't see anybody indicating that. Tim, we've got your attendance corrected.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, yeah. Mike will correct that. All right, let's just do this as a package. The September minutes that went out with the packet last week, you all had a chance to review. Are there any corrections, amendments, with the exception of the correction for Tim's attendance? I don't see anybody indicating they want to make corrections. Is there a motion to approve both sets of minutes? Show hands, somebody? Tim moves, Jeff seconds, all in favor? Aye, minutes are approved.
I have to abstain.
Jody abstain. We welcome Jody back. For those of you who are joining us a little late, we're the ones who caused the confusion for Jody and sent him running all over the place. So he was looking for us. We just weren't there because we forgot to tell him we wouldn't be there. Apologies again. I did want to follow up on at the very end of our meeting when we had public comment. There was a couple of comments about the website and also the access to our meeting materials. So we followed up with Roxanne White about that, and the materials that you receive in the packet are posted at the city's calendar where people can go and actually click on and say they want to register to watch or join the meeting. Admittedly, it's not always the easiest to find. I a few times didn't think they were there. And so I just encourage anybody who's watching or attends a meeting, any member of the public, if you have any questions about that, you can always address the questions to the I think it would be the communications department, or if not to Mike, but the materials have been there for the meeting. The important thing for FOIA is that we are required to post our agenda so many days in advance, which we do. And then we sometimes are scrambling to pull together all of the supporting materials. And then we try to follow up with another posting of the supporting materials. Again, we probably don't always have all of the supporting materials coming into the meeting, but we are required by FOIA to have that agenda. And obviously, if there's any question from the public about materials that we've discussed during the meeting that are not been subsequently posted, then we obviously will provide those materials. I think we went through this about a year and a half ago. It's not necessary that every last piece of material and paper be posted by, I think it's 72 hours ahead of the meeting. We make our best efforts, but we're all working and volunteers, and sometimes we have things that come in late. We do have, again, just so everybody understands, we do have 2 websites. There is one which is a standard board and commission website, which is functional. It lists some basic information, but really I think the place that if anybody asks, you should direct them to is our tree commission page on the Parks and Rec website, which you will pull up if you do a search, Charlottesville Tree Commission. That actually has a little bit more information. We'll continue to try to make that robust, but it is also much more, it's proximate to the other materials in Parks and Rec, like the urban forestry materials. So again, it does, we don't have a choice about having those 2 pages, but I think if anybody questions you, or if you were concerned or confused about this, really the best place to go is to our page on the Parks and Rec website. So I just wanted to clarify that since we ended the meeting with that. The other item before we actually get into the agenda is, and some of you already know this, but I have the sad tree news, that over the weekend, the oak in Maplewood Cemetery, the one that had been declared a landmark tree by the Charlottesville Tree Stewards, that was featured in the Arbor Day event, the second of the 2 Arbor Day events this past April, that we participated in, the Tree Commission participated in, and that there were actually quite a few attendees at that event. That tree crashed to the ground over the weekend. And it's a terrible loss for the tree, obviously, but it's a terrible loss for all of us. And I say that as a neighbor who were very fond of that tree. It existed, and if you want to know what that tree looked like, it's the tree you see behind Mark Zollenhofer. That was a beautiful giant oak, and Mark was updating me. We had it listed as a hybrid oak, but it was eventually determined to be a post oak. I'll call on Mike in a minute to talk more about the tree and what will happen going forward, because this is actually a complicated one. But that tree had, as I say, been on our agenda for quite a while, and we finally did put it through, and council approved it as one of the ordinance trees, which does raise just a few more, not hurdles, but a few more steps that need to be taken in order to remove the tree. I notified, this happened Sunday, the largest portion of the tree, right at sort of the crotch, but the main part of the tree came down during the night, Saturday into Sunday. The second part came down during the night yesterday. And there's still a precarious third limb up there, which has been all, Parks came out yesterday and put up a wide perimeter. The third limb is still up there. It's the last little portion of the tree. I thought it would come down last night, but it didn't. We were fortunate that it came down during the night, because that park is frequented by many people, dog walkers, people sitting there. I used to sit under that tree and read a lot. So it's a loss, but it could have been worse, because as Mike can attest, the sheer amount of tree on the ground is sort of unbelievable, how much ground it covers. So it could have easily caught somebody if it hadn't happened at night. Jody asked before the meeting began, Mike and I were out there looking today. Besides the tree, there is significant damage to the fabric of the cemetery. There are a lot of stones damaged, some for sure beyond repair. Some are just huge stones just thrown to the ground. We'll know more when they actually come to remove the tree. When I notified the tree stewards right away on Sunday, Robin Haynes told me that they had just received the marker, the landmark marker that they put up, I think last week, and they were going to come and put the marker in this week. So Mike and I talked today, and once it's cleared, and there'll obviously be a stump left and all that, our hopes is that the marker will be put in as a memorial, as a reminder to people of the tree that was there. I believe those markers come with a nice picture of the tree, so that there'll be something there to remind people, and especially in years to come, if people didn't know the tree that stood there. just watching people from the neighborhood just react to this, it reminds me that, in the last year or so, we've especially stressed the functional benefits of trees, the health benefits, the environmental benefits, obviously. And we've said that we try to send the message more and more that trees aren't beautiful things, but of course they are beautiful things. And they are important to people for reasons other than those functional things. And I think it just underscores the importance of protecting these trees, all of our trees, the civic responsibility to do so, that it's not just a civic benefit, but it's a social benefit, it's a cultural benefit. And for some people, it's actually a spiritual benefit to have these large green creatures with us, some of them towering way above us. And I'm just reminded, because again, we want to talk about how important trees are in many ways, but they're emotionally and psychologically important to people. If you didn't know this tree, I'm sure you have a tree nearby, or one that you've known in your life that is very special to you. And so you'll understand and appreciate how important the tree was as part of not just the cemetery, but again, of a piece of parkland within the city. So Mike, can you just tell us a little bit more, just what your estimation is, sort of not the age of the tree and the cause of the collapse, and what we're doing going forward?
Sure. So it was a tremendous post oak, if you recall, and it had two main leads, and they had been cabled previously together. And the function of a cable is to keep a tree from moving in excess the leads too far to the point of breakage. So it's not to prevent limb failure. So at the main crotch of the tree, of the two main leads, it had, you could see, it was very apparent on the tree that was on the ground that water had sitting there, and it had rot for many years. So it became too weak really to support it. If you remember, it was a tremendous tree. It had so much crown and limb weight. So this time of year too, we had oaks too. They're setting fruit, so all that acorn weight as well. So that's what it looks like was part of the failure.
This may be a question too for Mark, tree steward. Did we have any sense, just a general sense of the age? I guess we'll know when we can count the rings around the stump, but I mean, any estimate on how old that was? Mark, you're on mute. Mark, you're muted.
I would guess somewhere between 150 and 200 years old, but I think Mike has more familiarity with the trees in our city, and he might have a better number than that.
200 would be my guess.
Yeah. Just for historical reference, the cemetery opened in 1827, which means that if we date it about as old as that, in that range, it puts the tree about there when the cemetery was first carved out of farmland. Of course, this was not Charlottesville, this was Albemarle County, but so that tree is basically almost as old as the cemetery. Mike, just talk about the specifics, the mechanics of getting it out. I think it's important because this is a tree that we took ownership for, and it's a conservation tree. So can you just tell us a little bit about the location and also the process for removing the tree?
Sure. So looked at it today, and I spoke with my contractor. He was able to look at it yesterday, and we have some ideas. It gets really challenging when we get into the tremendous wood and the wood weight of dealing with this tree. So there's a few different options if we were to remove the tree using sort of mini skid steers and material handlers, and just slowly one cut at a time and just getting it out of the cemetery. That is, that's equipment that we have on hand. If we want to remove the tree entirely to a stump, it's something we would need, something in the neighborhood of like 150-ton crane that we'd have to put in the street. The problem is with our crane and Stan Machine's crane is we can get it into the cemetery, but there's nowhere to put out the outriggers and things like that because it's such a tight area to work in. So it would have to be, a large crane. in the street. And to mobilize a crane that size is about $40,000 just to mobilize it and get it there with counterweights and things like that. So discuss with my contractor, and I'm of the mind is to get the tree out and get it cleaned out, and then we may have a log standing in the interim until we figure out or come up with funding to address that.
So again, just for people to understand, it's the center of the cemetery. This is what makes it very difficult. It's at the highest point. It's actually on a slope. There's just no place around to get, as Mike said, get equipment in. So it's a very tricky situation. So the neighborhood association's been apprised, I think, too, because there's a lot of interest and concern as to how the tree's going to be removed. I mean, in your guess, Mike, this is a multi-day effort. This is not a quick cleanup. Yeah.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, our contractor, he's tied up for the rest of this week and next week. So the soonest it would be the following week after that. So we're looking at 2 weeks out before we can begin cleanup.
Yep. And because it was under the conservation ordinance, we have to make sure one of the boxes we have to check is that Mike has to clear this with the city administrator. So one of the protections, we've talked about this as we were nominating trees. One of the protections, obviously Mike has to certify, which he clearly will be able to certify, that the tree is no longer extant. It's not going to survive and it needs to come out. But it is one of the requirements of the ordinance. So, and I think we would kind of take care of that.
That's correct. Yes, I had to submit a memo to the city manager for approval to remove the tree since it is protected under our conservation ordinance.
All right, well, it's just another bit of evidence that all life is rather tenuous. So we'll go forward nominating more trees. We're going to talk a little bit about the current packet and looking forward. We have a chance this evening. So.
Jackie,
Thanks,
had a
Mike.
question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, was there a question there?
Oh, Mike, just on a quick suggestion. We have a humongous oak behind a rental property that also had major accessibility issues for removing the wood. And I got the name of a tree removal service. I think they're out of Madison that invested recently in a humongous truck with a claw, if you will, that was going to reach over our house and remove the wood that way. I don't know if that's any type of machinery that would be of interest to you, but I'd be happy to share that name on if it's something that might just help you sort through this.
Sure. So our contract we call it a pal finger, and it's essentially a grapple with a cutter on the end of it, and it has as much reach as a 40-ton crane. So it sounds comparable, but again, it's really not enough. When we get into big wood, I don't even think the grapple can open as wide as we need to pick the wood and things like that. So unfortunately, we need a really large crane.
We don't have our commission member who is our data person, but also a woodworker, but sure would be nice because I know on past trees that we've had issues, I think we've lost limbs. He's put out a call for anybody who wants wood, and I'm not trying to complicate this here, Mike, but there is some heritage. I know where it was at the crotch, it's not very good, but there are the small limbs are still this big around. So I don't know if that's something that complicates, but we probably should talk about that. There may be some interest in some old oak. Your thoughts?
Yeah, we can. We're gonna, because it is gonna be so much wood. Regardless, we're gonna have to stage it at Penn Park for the meantime. So we have plenty of time to figure that out.
Make a nice bench. Would make probably 100 nice benches if we could get somebody interested in doing that. All right, thanks, Mike. And we'll obviously come back at the next meeting and update you on this. So before Peggy heads out, there are a couple of items that I wanted her to address. I think one of them is on the agenda, but I think it's just really an update to the dashboard. And then she could talk a little bit about the last 3 weeks with Siebel. Really, Peggy?
All right. I wanted to make you all jealous with the picture behind you. because I'm actually in Vermont on vacation. So I'm not staying very long. We're going out to dinner, a very special restaurant very soon. But anyway, the other thing I want to point out, I think the tree is behind Mark. Is that right, Mark? Is that the oak?
Yeah, that's it.
That's the burrow. Yeah. So you can see how massive that tree was. Anyway, before I go, I sent you out an update about Seville Relief. I'll just go through it really quickly. We've been busy. Jeff and Mike and I went to over to Venable and Lugo McGinnis, and they're right on the borderline of 10th and Page neighborhood, which is our target neighborhood. And also Venable serves the 10th and Page kids, so it seems a good place to plant trees. And also they have a very hot playground. As I showed you those 2 temperatures we took on the same day. Talk about the benefit of trees. 20 degrees difference literally between the shaded playground and the hot playground. 102 degrees to 82 degrees. Anyway, so Mike and Jeff and I found about 15 to 17 places to plant trees, which is going to be great. I think you remember too, as we talked about Seville Relief, the major planting on private property won't happen till next fall. So what we want to do is get kids and families excited about trees and the green industry. So we're really starting with some educational events. Lucy Hartlett, who's with the parks, is working on a presentation we're going to give to all 3rd and 4th graders at Venable about the value of trees, and particularly the trees on their playground. Just in the one shaded playground alone, I think there are like 10 different trees. So that'll be fun to talk about. And we're also thinking about giving them t-shirts about remember how important trees are. Then at Legal McGinnis, we're going to work with Carolyn Schuyler at Wild Rock. She's actually going to do a year-long unit on the importance of trees and climate change and heat islands in the city. And so we're going to plant some trees there, and but we'll work with them throughout the year. I think Jeff has suggested that someone in his office can help them talk about designing their campus, which they're going to look at. And then we were really lucky to find Erin Gibner at CHS. She's an environmental teacher. She has been willing to put together a unit on trees for the whole school system. She'll work with all the ISTEM coordinators. And so this is really going to be neat, I think. You know, we'll get the kids excited and they're bound to convince their parents. Part of the recent donation we got is we need to do a website. So we're working on some materials and the website on that. So that's, if anybody has any questions. I don't think I left anything out. Oh, the City of Promise. We're also going to work, do the same Venable presentation. We'll try it out with 3rd and 4th graders there, see how it works. See if we don't, hopefully we're not going to bore them. And then we'll do it at the City of Promise too, because many of those kids don't go to Venable right now. Any questions?
The school, I was just going to say that school-wide effort is wonderful.
Yeah, that's good. We were so great to find Erin. She's very excited.
Any comments or questions from any other members of the commission? Jean?
I was wondering if there's any way, or maybe you're already doing it, get an article about that difference between temperatures in the 2 playgrounds somehow in the newspaper.
Well, that's
Get people starting to think about that.
That's an interesting idea, Jean. I'll write it down.
I'd be happy to write something if you give me the people I should talk to. And,
Okay.
And the images.
All right. We're working on some images too, better than the ones you've seen, that'll tell the story a little bit better. I'm going to be away for about a week and a half. So when I get back, I'll contact you. We'll talk about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy, we also in the office have a temperature gun. So it uses a laser basically, and you can point it at something and get a temperature reading of a surface. So rather than ambient air temperatures, you can actually get a surface that may, again, lead to that, lead more credence to this argument.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Uh,
like when it's 102 in ambient temperature, what are the swings? What's the temperature of the swing material?
Yeah,
Yeah.
those surfaces of the swings can be in the 120s to
Yeah.
40s, 140s.
Yeah.
It's hot.
Yeah, all the metal equipment that's out there. And so we know it's important to get shade, particularly young ones are, and the hot playground too is the young kids playground, which is too bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll get with Eugene when I get back. And I
Okay.
know Jacqueline has also expressed interest in helping, so I can get with her too.
Mark? You're on mute, yeah.
Yeah, the CATS board met yesterday. And since I'm trying to be liaison between the two, there were some questions about getting more information from the tree commission. Is it okay if I share the currently edited Charlottesville Relief page here with the board?
Oh, sure, the one that's in the package.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
And the tree stewards, we hope to have one thing, COVID is really kind of bitten into us a little bit. We'd hope to have a little celebration with the tree stewards because they're going to be planting a few trees in 10th and Page in this fall, but they don't want people to be on the campus. So we weren't able to do that. But the tree stewards also, and we had a discussion with them last week, I think it was. They are going to go out and hope to plant maybe 10 to 15 trees this year. And they might be calling you, Tim, because I think a couple of your neighbors have actually, you gave us a couple of neighbors that were interested. And I passed that on.
Yeah. You pass that on. Yeah, that's great. And that's my chance to jump in and just, well, first say this is a great effort and thanks for the update and thanks for, sharing the info. I did have a question though, and that's the perfect segue in that I heard from one of the CATS members, Kendra Hall, who's been involved with this overall effort. And I just didn't understand fully the context of this inquiry about maybe walking the neighborhood this month and asking if people want free trees planted in their yard. So I just can't make sense if that's the exact same thing or if these are parallel efforts or if more coordination is perhaps beneficial. Does that ring a bell either to you, Peggy, or perhaps you, Mark? Did that come up at the board meeting yesterday?
My understanding is Kendra's not going to walk around to just any old people in the neighborhood. That the tree stewards too got a grant from a landowner in the neighborhood to do some tree planting for this fall. My understanding is really Kendra is just going to go to sort of people she's been told that want a tree or have a couple of people have raised their hand during different meetings. So it's not a whole neighborhood effort. It's just a few because they only have enough money for like 10 to 15 trees.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, there's a guy named Jeremy Kaplan who is seen as you probably know him, I guess, has dealt with a lot of people in 10th and Page neighborhood. And he was working with Kendra and William, I forget his name, to do some hands-on stuff with CATS and identify some people. But I think his schedule has gotten full. And so Kendra yesterday said that she's not as hopeful in terms of the number of trees that CATS was hoping to do this fall, but they're still moving forward with trying to do some of them. So it's going to be a matter probably of shoulder tapping kinds of things of people who we know have some interest and are willing for us to work with them. So the CATS effort is going to continue, and it'll sort of be in parallel this fall with the educational stuff that the Tree Commission is doing with Peggy.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That sounds good. And I just heard from Kendra last week kind of unexpectedly, so I thought I'd wait till this meeting to, engage everybody and try to get some context before following up with her. But, whether it's strictly the folks who have kind of indicated they're interested in, recent months, or if it is more of a canvassing type effort, which is what her message kind of sounds like. Regardless, I'm happy to, walk with her. It sounds like she or, Katz has prepared some information to leave behind to explain more about the program. So got some learning to do to connect the dots, but trees are trees. And if we can bump up from 19% canopy coverage and 10th and Page, that's a worthy goal, no matter how we get there.
Tim,
Yeah,
I-
in the past, the two Belmont projects, Belmont 1 and Belmont 2, a procedure was sort of developed of the materials that were helpful to homeowners, and Kendra is revising those to be appropriate for 10th and Page, and so she's intending to have some packets of material that she can share with people when she identifies those who have some interest.
Very good.
Yeah. Oh,
I think
and I
it's-
just mentioned quickly, the Venable tree presentation is going to happen on November 3rd and 4th, I think it is. So I don't, we obviously we were hoping kind of to do more canvassing after we get kids excited. But I do think Kendra's is interest, Tim, in not, doing the whole neighborhood. It's just doing a few people that she's heard are interested. That's my understanding.
I think it's beneficial to have this conversation publicly, because I think people should know that there are multiple efforts going on. And frankly, as we've discussed before, this is our strength going forward in terms of public, private, the commission, tree stewards, commission planting, working with Mike and Parks and Rec on public lands, but the importance of planting in the neighborhoods, so that it's not, what Peggy and I had discussed some months back was that this is not, things don't get confused and people don't get confused and wonder, well, I thought this was already done. And now people are coming back and talking, about trees. And so there has been, I know Peggy has worked to sort of make sure that people are all pulling together, but obviously people are going to be doing separate efforts, but they, as to Tim's point, they all go to the same goal. But clearly this is the model going forward. And obviously it's not just the model for Charlottesville. As we look around, we realize that in a lot of communities, they are public-private efforts to get to the place we want to get to. This is another good segue, because she sent me my marching orders. I had a page full of notes in my email about 9 o'clock this morning. But this is just to stress when we look at the trees in a bit, because she may not be around for the whole planting list. You wanted to stress the point, Peggy, about not just playgrounds.
Well, we talked about, as we look at our new tree planting, Mike had developed a really nice priority list that we adopted maybe a year ago. I can't remember. But as we sort of looked at Venable, we thought, well, why aren't we giving priority to playgrounds? And we know how important it is, shade on the playground. So I'm hoping, I won't be here because I'm going to be called away in a few minutes. But I'm hoping as we talk about the new trees, we could add a priority to playgrounds, and also, where people sit and gather in parks or on schools. It's very, it's nice to find a bench under a tree or to gather under a tree. So I hope that y'all will consider that. We talked about it last time, but really didn't act on it. So I'm hoping that those can be a number 3 priority too. And I think Brian and I talked about, maybe in the next year, we would sort of form a plan to sort of look and assess the playgrounds, start with the playgrounds on the schools and the parks, and sort of look at them and see what needs, and over time, add more trees.
I mean, a perfect example of that is what just happened in the cemetery. That tree was a gathering place for people, not just because it was a nice part of the cemetery, but because it provided so much shade, and people use that space as a park. And so now there is this giant, we'll see it next summer, this giant baking hole where it won't be as pleasant a place to gather. Mike,
One quick,
yeah.
could I just say one quick On the Venable playground, the hot playground, it is going to be difficult to find places for shade trees. But Mike's has come up with a solution that will take some time to implement. But that means having to replace some of the playground mulch that's there and then plant trees along the edge. I particularly wanted Tim to understand this because he might wonder why we didn't put any trees near that playground because his children go to Venable. But over time, we plan to plant them along the sidewalk and the asphalt parking lot, which of course even makes that playground hotter because it's next to those two hot surfaces. So I just wanted to, Tim, I wanted to make sure you knew that. Over time, we'll get there.
I think as we've identified priorities for planting, and we've done some of this, but maybe we just need to be a little more systematic about this. When we identify places, this is a perfect example. We hadn't been talking about playgrounds until quite recently. And in our conversation with Mike, Peggy and I had a while back, it may be that we need to put them, in our planting guide and all that material, we need to put places where we say, okay, well, in order to be involved in this decision-making, we need to know like who and where and when plans are being made to make changes to city property so that we're in early enough on the conversation. So whether that is with Public Works or with, the school division or whoever, so that wherever we identify that the importance of having trees, whether they're there now and they might be removed or they're not there at all, because what may happen is that we come along a little late to the conversation. I'm not saying the playground would have been completely designed for trees, but it might have been to get in there a little earlier would have been the easier thing to do. So I'm not sure how to solve that, except to say that there are others in the city that we need to be in some kind of communication with if we think that these are priorities for where we put trees.
Can I, on that
Jody?
line, I just heard as a result of a walk around Greenleaf Trail that Mr. Wade, the candidate for council, mentioned that Burnley is now going through a master planning for revising their fields and play areas, but also the courts. And so, and I pass by there and I see just a lot of open area with very few trees. So I throw it out there in case maybe Mike knows something about this already, but just in case it's under the radar, wanted to put it out there.
Thank you. I mean, bottom line is we need to be as proactive and aggressive, particularly where we have some ability to weigh in on decisions, and that is on the city's property. So wherever we find places where it's reasonable to plant or if need be to replant after construction, we need to be, my point is we need to be there early enough. So knowing that is something we can add to the list, and I'm not sure how we regularize that process so we know it in a sort of a regular way, just like for a while when we were getting site plans from NDS on the major developments that we thought might impact trees. At least it allowed us the commission a chance to weigh in. We obviously have no authority in that case to, vote up or down on this plan, but we had an opportunity to come in early. And I think we should think of that as the model for any other ways in which development on either private property affecting public trees or on public property that we're involved early. Mike, I didn't pull up the whole packet, but since I know you've got your list, and I do actually want to defer on the annual report and go to talking about the planting list. Did you send out the little prioritization ranking sheet, especially for new members? I don't have the full packet in front of me.
I had last month. I didn't send it out again this month.
Okay.
So just the ranking. I just sent the planting list.
Okay, if members, I don't have it in hand, but if members have the packet just from last month, it's a good reference as we start talking about that list and how we sort of scored things. It would be good for people to have it in front of them. So that's why I bring it up. Let's defer the annual report because that actually ties into a broader, more immediate subject that we'll and I know this is a curveball to Mike because this means we're ahead of schedule and usually we push him way off. We're going to talk about the tree planting list and schedule and treat this, since the committee didn't have an opportunity to meet since we had a short turnaround between meetings. We'll sort of sit as a committee of the whole and go through the list. Mike's gonna, he's winnowed it and he's made some recommendations, but he reminded me that this is still an iteration. This is not the final list that we're going to vote on. So I think there's a good opportunity, since we're all here, to discuss the list. So Mike, you want to walk us through that and your thinking on this?
Brian, I'm gonna have
Peggy?
to say goodbye.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to say goodbye. Should I
All right.
give you any more marching orders?
No, I've memorized them all. Thank you. Don't know what I would do without Peggy.
All right,
Thanks. Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
dinner.
I
Bye.
will. Let's see how I can leave. Let's see. Oh, I just closed it down. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, Mike, floor's yours.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through the entire list. There's 165 trees on it currently. So we expect to have money for about 150, 160 trees. And I do, as I go through and mark some of these planting locations, I expect to find more. So we will need, I will need feedback from the commission, from the prioritization, as far as setting priorities. Peggy had suggested before, gathering areas, like playgrounds and things where people sit. That's fine with me. If I could get some more feedback, I'm happy to take a stab at the rubric and the ranking system, and then bring something back to the commission. Or if subcommittee would like to work on it,
I think maybe it would help. Can you share your list with us?
I can.
And we do have a little time to get into the weeds, so to speak, or into the branches on this. So I think first of all, just to back up, obviously, there was some input, and thanks to Jeff, developed an opportunity for people, commissioners, to have some input, and we'll continue to formalize that process. So that's great. But it might not have been that everybody had a chance to really sort of look at this list, even this shortened list. So if we could see it, and then
If the host, Remy, if you could let me share my screen, that would be great.
and we can, we can jump in anywhere. There can be any kinds of questions. I know in the past, people have had questions about species and, tell us more about that location. I mean, if there's anything that strikes anybody. And the flip side too, Mike, is that I know you and I talked a little bit about this morning. You might have be able to just direct us as to not just the prioritization, but anything here that you think should be called out to us. Either it's not a definite that you still have to go. You had said that there might be some need to do a final assessment. Also, the issue of when a resident is resistant to a recommendation. I know you want the commission to discuss that. So it's two ways here. I mean, I think we can all look at this and sort of ask questions or anything that jumps out at us, but also it would help us if you just sort of gave us your overall thinking beyond the prioritization. Like, is there anything anomalous here that you want us to look at?
Sure. So I don't have the ability to share my screen at the moment. So one thing that I've run into in the past and this time is where there'll be an ideal location in the right of way, whether it be in front of a private residence or behind it or on a side street on the side of their property. Some people are very reluctant to have trees planted for many different reasons. They don't trust that the city will maintain it. They don't want to deal with the leaves. They don't want it to fall on their home. Many different reasons, but some people are very reluctant. Even if you try to explain, the tremendous amount of benefits that trees provide and that they provide to the community, people still, they just, for one reason or another, are reluctant to have trees planted in the right of way. But again, since it is public property and it is city right of way, Is there really a mechanism? There's not really a mechanism to address that, right? So in the past, I've done my best to work with people because we don't want to put a tree directly in front of someone's house that doesn't want it, that it's going to get vandalized or otherwise. But again, I have these other properties where say it's in sort of the rear of their property. They don't have to see it every day. It's on the side street, or it's just a really ideal condition for a street tree. So then I run into these sort of conflicts. So I'd love to know how the commission felt about utilizing this public space when it's contested.
Well, you know how I feel because I've expressed it a number of times. I'm curious how other commissioners feel, because Mike is looking to us for guidance and support. Any commissioners want to address this?
I'll just share my opinion or my perspective that if we're talking about the city's municipal utilization of public right-of-way, we should consider homeowners their stated interests or considerations, but should not feel bound to what one private property owner feels about the use of public right-of-way by the public local government. And I think all the other considerations for me fall behind that primary conclusion.
I see some nodding of heads. Other thoughts about that? Vicki?
I agree with Tim, and I just wonder, Mike, when this has happened before, have you been able to fairly easily find a substitute location to plant that tree?
I can. There's no shortage of planting locations. Sometimes if it's in a low canopy neighborhood or otherwise, it's a shame when it's an ideal location for a large shade tree on the street. You hate to not utilize that, but it's about listening and working with the entire community as well. So. Okay, it looks like I can share my screen now.
I have a sense that that's the opinion of the commission. It has been the opinion of some of us in the past that we want to, obviously we do, as several have said, we want to work with residents because that's part of educating and advocating for trees. So we're not dropping trees into people's neighborhoods and running off. We don't want them to feel that the tree is a burden. But I think at the end of the day, we're responsible. Mike is responsible, and the tree commission is responsible for. There's that, and also it might help if you pull up the table. I don't know if everybody has it on screen, but the table itself is a little small from how I'm looking at it. So, but to the point of, I think that I feel that Mike has done a very good job of working with people in the past. I think on some occasions he's actually agreed to plant a smaller canopy tree so that there would be something in that street right of way. And so we have shown flexibility to do that, but I think just an adamant refusal to have, for example, a tree of any kind, even if it would be a small tree because the street is essentially denuded. I think we'd want to argue on behalf of the whole, the city as a whole. But in this case that you raised this morning, Mike, and we don't necessarily need to talk about the specifics, but my understanding was that this was an ideal place for not just one tree. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it was where a large tree was previously, right? That came out of the right of way. Yeah. In this instance, but.
And so without setting too firm a policy, what Mike and I discussed this morning about this is that we will, in terms of when Mike makes his recommendations or gives us a report, whether it's the initial list or the final list, preferably the initial list, we'll have this conversation. And so I think the public should know that we will have this conversation, and that if we think all the factors weigh in on supporting Mike's decision to either plant in a location or to plant a larger tree than others might want, especially if it becomes more removed from their property. Some of you may remember several years ago, there was a complaint about putting trees on East High Street with the new construction, and we had we had worked very hard to get large canopy trees on the plan. And there was a person who came to a public hearing who was very upset about those trees because there would be noise when the leaves were cleaned up. And the person who was aggrieved lived about a half a mile away. So, I mean, there's got to be something reasonable about if somebody really feels that, you know, either they're going to be adversely impacted in a significant way. So we need to have some flexibility, but I think what Mike wanted to see in here is that we support him. And we would, you know, say, err on the side of the public. And while incorporating, you know, individual residents, that when you make your decisions, you bring your decisions to us. First and foremost, you think about what's good for the city. And once you've made that effort to work with the resident, but we'll have your back because the commission thinks that this is an important thing to do. Do you have any other thoughts about that, Mike, or does that help you with some?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I just want to make sure, you know, everyone's on the same page. So sounds like, you know, it's always going to be easier to try to work with people first.
Yeah.
But again, you know, there's definitely a public interest in large shade trees. So.
And I also want to say, because this has come up several times this year, most recently with the damage to the tree on the mall, which Mike will update us about later, that the commission is not just this sort of silent partner in the group in the background, that if a citizen has a concern and wants to take it up with Mike, obviously he's a contact point, but that we're happy to listen as well. The commission is happy to listen as well, not just to ideas, but to criticisms and complaints. So just to continue that outreach and that we discuss these things with Mike. So he's not just sort of operating out there in a vacuum and then reporting back to us after the fact. I think it's important for the public to understand that. Mark?
I noticed a week or so ago while I was on vacation, I was reading the daily progress on my iPhone, which was difficult, of course, but one of the things about a week and a half ago was an article about the 3 current candidates for city council. And I was very encouraged that all 3 of them were using language about heat islands and tree canopy and all that kind of stuff that we've been wanting to get the public to be aware of. And so I think we can reference those people's comments as we talk to homeowners, especially in neighborhoods that have low canopy cover, to say that our representatives are behind what we're trying to do for the sake of the city. I think it can give an additional piece of leverage for homeowners who are a little bit resistant. I mean, if they're totally resisting, then we're just going to pour gas on a fire. But if they're waffling a little bit, I think the public interest is important.
Thanks.
And I would add to that the comprehensive plan, when it's finally done, is going to have significant statements about supporting trees, adding trees, and the environmental health of the city, and that being an objective, important objectives, critical objectives. It also has showed up in the surveys about the comp plan and areas that are important to people. So there's a great deal of support for adding for the public good of adding trees to the city.
Yep, both very good points. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the rubric we talked about before, and it sounded like there's interest in changing some of these things to gathering areas and playgrounds. I'm happy to take a stab at this and provide a draft for the commission to take a look at, and then that's how we can rank the tree planting list.
So I think what we had agreed was that we would stay with this criteria for now, since we worked to develop this criteria for this cycle.
Okay.
And that we always have the opportunity once, I mean, we can, so to speak, overrule ourselves at the end. I mean, we can look and see, and I'm sorry that Mark Rylander is not here this afternoon because he is the one who raised this point. We can look and we can say, well, if we use this model and this matrix in 2-3 years in a row, we see disproportionate plantings and we're sort of ignoring some other things that might slightly fall below that in terms of priority. I mean, we do have the opportunity to come back and adjust this list. Every year I've been on the commission, we've sort of nipped and tucked at it, which is what I hope we can do a little bit this evening or before the final list. But that this is still a good, so focus more on getting the list finalized for this cycle. And then we can come back and sort of revisit the issue and maybe tweak the matrix a little, the grading a little. I did want to just back up. When you said 150 to 160 trees, the list right now is a little bit bigger than, longer than that. Now that estimate of trees is based on what the current price is for trees. I guess it'd be good to update the commission because we haven't talked about pricing.
Sure. So trees last year were $450 on average installed. So we figure we're gonna have about enough money for, say, safely like 150 trees.
So again, that pricing is the current pricing or it hasn't changed, you're saying, since the pandemic?
I would be surprised if it came down. So it's pretty much a safe bet that we're going to be paying about the same. That, $450 per tree on average installed, that was lowest bid also last year.
So I'm just, sorry, I'm not good with the math right now, but that means that $75,000 will get us about 150 trees. 150, 160 trees.
Correct.
Obviously a contingency plan. I mean, if for some reason that price rose considerably, then you'd have to come back to us and we'd have to, it doesn't sound like you're going to have to make major changes to the list, but if for some reason the price flew up, then we'd have to discuss that.
Definitely.
Again, for the commission to remember, with $75,000, right? The purchase, the other item, the other question I had is, when you make this, I don't think we've ever discussed this, when we have this finalized list, what then is the process for, are you purchasing like all of the trees, or are you purchasing them as you go along? You have a plan to plant 25 in the next month, so you're going to plant 25 trees. I'm just curious about the mechanics of how you go about this process.
Sure. So we build an RFQ for this and it goes out to bid. So contractors just bid on what it costs to plant these 160 trees. So it gets more detailed into the number of, they have to give a price for the number of yellow poplars installed and things like that. And then the gator bags and mulch all gets itemized in labor and things like that. But essentially it's, we're asking for an RFQ to plant all of these trees from one company.
Okay, may I have a follow-up, but I see Jacqueline's hand is up.
Mike, you just answered one of my questions about if the water bags were included. So great. The other question I have, just from the little tree planting we did in our neighborhood, will the nursery or whomever is planting guarantee for several years? And what would happen if the tree should perish, say, in the first 6 months or the first year? Would they replace it?
So all the trees are, we have in our RFQ, in our contract, that they are guaranteed for 1 year, that's pretty industry standard.
1 year?
So yes, 1 year. So if they die, they get replaced.
And have you had to do that much?
Yeah.
And
So,
the problem with them actually coming back and doing it?
I have not, I mean, you have to remind people to come do warranty work. But we're fortunate we've made sure it's gotten done. We do our best, and we did water the trees well this summer. We try to keep them alive as many alive as we can. We're much better about that than it has been in the past. You know, people say, you know, why do we have to water the trees and care for them? They're under warranty. If they die, they just get replaced. But then when the tree gets replaced and you don't water them again, if you don't have staff to do it or a water truck, then the tree dies again and it's not replaced. You know, and then you're kicking this can down the road and you're still not getting trees. You're still not growing trees and giving the community what they want, right? So it's really important, even if they're under warranty, for us to have staff to water them.
And is that typically a problem, sometimes a problem?
Yes, I mean, it can be really challenging, especially, you know, where you're not, you know, immune to the labor crunch that everyone else is feeling right now as well. So I'm happy to say we worked very hard to get the tree, and we had a short list of trees last year of 23 trees. So, but we've been able to keep them watered.
Well, let me just this is reminding me of an incident where we had a reluctant homeowner that we gave a tree to. And anyway, long story short, there's a big difference between someone who wants a tree and will actually help you with because even though it's technically the city's tree, I think sometimes we found at least that neighbors are happy to join in and help water the tree. So, you know, that argues a little bit on, I completely concur with Tim on the importance of, you know, city property, getting some shade trees in there. Totally understand that. I also just, gosh, wonder if there isn't a way that we could enlist kind of little watchdogs for the trees to help you because I've just seen some of the city trees perish in our neighborhood and appreciate you explaining to me the process for caring once they're in the ground.
Sure, yeah, it's always a challenge. And we've looked at other cities. San Diego has their residents sign something saying that they'll water it for 2 years and things like that. So it's a challenge. We're always exploring other options. But this is what we've been doing. We found works well for us when we have staff to do it. So.
Yeah, this raises a whole bunch of issues, which we'll take up in a bit, in terms of resources.
Yeah.
So you've just answered some questions there. I mean, even in the best of times, putting 150, 160 trees in and keeping them alive for a year is going to be a challenge. These aren't the best of times in terms of staff, of resources. So that's a concern. To Jacqueline's point, I do think, and to what I was mentioning earlier, I do think that the planting of trees, public trees, which affect obviously private citizens, is an opportunity to educate and advocate. So for the, you know, for example, and I think you may have done this before, but if somebody says, I really don't want a large tree here, I have issues with a large tree, and you feel like, okay, well, really, we could put a smaller canopy tree here and all that, it might be an opportunity to say, we'd love to put some tree here because you'll appreciate just having some sidewalk shade. And then maybe they might even be interested in, to Jacqueline's point, saying, you know, adopting that tree for a year. And, you know, sort of, I think that actually does, I think sometimes people are afraid trees are going to maybe bite them. But if they see after a while that, oh, it's actually nice to have this little tree here. So we got to find creative ways because, for example, I haven't mentioned this to Mike recently, but, you know, we had a tree that we put in the cemetery here, the oak, and not the one that fell, but a small oak to replace a large cedar that fell. I don't know if that's the first or second one. I think it's still the first one, but that still needs to be replaced. So we have a dead small oak tree there, which again, I understand in the circumstances, there's a lot else going on. It is depressing for those of us who live and drive and walk by there. In a way, it'd be better to be no tree than a sad dead oak. Then we have the resource and the staffing issue. So I guess this raises the question, Mike, you're going to prepare to plant 150 trees. So how do you feel about the coming year and the need to sustain these trees?
Sure. So, for example, this past year, I think we usually hire 17 seasonals that work at parks in the summertime. I think we were able to fill 3 of those positions. So that's just seasonal staff. Our full-time staff, we're down about 1/3 from where we need to be at full-time positions. We have enough We have a staff of 7 gardeners. We only have 3 currently on staff. So, they're responsible for young tree care and mulching and things like that and maintain the flower beds. And so we're very short-handed. We are doing the best that we can, but it seems like it's kind of everywhere. You look, everyone's sort of having these labor shortages.
You probably have considered this, but just hearing you say that makes me think, is there a strategy in terms of, I know you're gonna have to put these out to bid, you're gonna get all the trees, but in terms of actually putting them in the ground, obviously there's seasonal considerations, but in terms of staff and resource considerations. So it'd be terrible if, as a commission, we'd be saying, great, we got our $75,000 here. We didn't plant 23 trees last year. Let's go ahead and just throw a whole bunch of trees in the ground and come back a year from now and 3/4 are dead or dying. So have you thought about like what your strategy might be in terms of like matching? Right now, it doesn't sound like you have the resources to sustain all of these trees if we were to plant them tomorrow. It sounds like that would be a real challenge, correct?
That's correct. I mean, it's hard to say, where the chips are going to land on this labor crunch and all the fallout from COVID. It's hard to say what next year's going to bring. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to hire sufficient seasonal staff and full-time employees. I'm hoping we can address that. But yeah, there's other options too. If we wanted to look at planting fewer trees, using $50,000 to plant trees, and then using $25,000 from that CIP funding to hire seasonals to maintain them. So there's other options, there's other ways to look at it, but it would mean fewer trees in the ground, right?
I think the goal remains to we already know that we're behind the curve on planting. So I think the goal would be to get those trees in. But can you give us a sense in terms of like, you take the money, you take the pool, you take the final list, you're gonna go out, you're gonna bid, you're gonna get 150 trees. When are those going in the ground?
So these would probably go in the ground December, January.
Okay, that's not a lot of time for things to change in terms of where we are right now for staff. And so I guess what I was wondering, is there another sort of second best time to plant the trees? Like, I think we should commit, and I would be interested to hear from the rest of the commission. I don't want to back off on the goal of planting numbers, but I think we should pair that and marry that to resources, and to the extent that we can. I know we don't have a crystal ball, but we know that things aren't probably going to get much better between now and December. So what's sort of a backup plan? Is there a backup plan?
Well, the maintenance and the watering involved wouldn't begin till spring, so probably like April. So that would be, we would try to have those positions filled in March and April. So we do have that much time. But yeah, as far as a plan B for getting them watered, I mean, again, I'm just kind of remaining hopeful that we'll be able to hire enough staff.
I mean, I'm just, Jacqueline, did you want to address this question of our resources?
You're on mute.
Mike, I appreciate your dilemma. I do, and I am so reluctant to say less trees and using some of the money for watering, just because, the numbers to me as a new commission member of how hard it is to get above, to sort of to play, to even keep our numbers even for tree planting in the city is such a challenge. So I really I can't jump on board to dialing back the number of trees. One thought on, do you gain any efficiency if we cluster trees together a little bit? So the truck, I'm imagining the truck making fewer stops. I mean, would that be something I'm just thinking about, possibly less manpower? Would that be something that would make sense to you?
Sure, we've thought about that and we've looked at that, and we've individually planted clusters in the past. And it takes so many minutes to water the tree, fill the gator bag, pull the hose, and then move the truck. It's kind of like you're saving a little bit of windshield time, but you're really not gaining a lot. They still use the same amount, and then they have to go back and fill up. So yes and no, it saves you some time.
Are there
This is
other
probably-
comments?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a comment, Brian. This is probably a conversation, a longer conversation, and maybe not for today, but if in the future there was the possibility of being able to enlist a volunteer corps, but not necessarily volunteer, but actually a paid youth corps that could do this sort of work of tending, watering. It's sort of like a civilian conservation corps, but for the urban areas. And I don't know if like DCNR or, like if there are youth programs that could be initiated at Lugo McGinnis or other schools in the area where kids could be assigned to a cohort of trees that are planted by the city. And there could be money allocated towards that program out of this fund that we're talking about, using to plant trees that would actually help facilitate their engagement in ownership of those trees being maintained and growing and surviving. Because I think what we've heard in the past is that typically these urban trees fail because the neighbor is not enthusiastic about them being there, or the city doesn't have the resources. But if you actually engage the community in the importance of that, and sometimes it can't just be volunteer, it actually has to be like somebody who in the community is given an incentive, and typically like some sort of monetary incentive to say, if this tree survives, there's value in that for you, but there's actually a monetary value. Like, are there programs like that where there are groups of community members that can facilitate the care? I mean, I know it removes some of that from your department, Mike, and it puts it in the sort of civilian area. How could something like that be incentivized? And I don't really know the answer to that, but I'm just putting that out there, and it's not anything we have to solve today or even discuss, but I'm curious.
I think that's a great point. And I wish Peggy were here, because I'm actually envisioning that it might not necessarily just have to be through the city, but actually with the education effort that they're laying the ground for in Seaville Relief, there might actually be an opportunity going forward. So if you get, we've said this before, we see it with climate change right now. The effort that was made in Arbor Day, get to the kids, they get to their parents. So I think there might be opportunities even outside of the city's budget, again, to not touch our actual tree planting budget, but to leverage a public-private partnership that's also educating people that then can turn around and use some of that money that's raised from nonprofits to say, we've created this program where there is some kind of financial incentive for young people to actually be, and I know this is a patented term, but to be tree stewards. Copyrighted term, tree stewards, but I mean to learn at a young age. So I think it's a great point. I think we should have this conversation. We should develop this further, and it would reduce some of the resources, the resource crunch. We're going to talk in a minute about resources and new leadership in the department, because this is, we're at a point. It's an opportunity, but we're at a point where so many factors have weighed in to affect Parks and Recreation as an organization, as a department. For all those who are working so hard to do the work for multiple people in that department and assuming other roles, it's an opportunity that the commission will have to be have some input on all of these issues. My concern about, just to go back to Jacqueline's point, my concern about taking money from the money that we work really hard in CIP to go to City Council to get, first of all, just the messaging to City Council if we were to dilute that. So I take your point, Mike, and I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying it was a bad idea, but if City Council finds out that 75,000, but we use 25,000 to hire people, so there's that optic. But more importantly, we want to be in a position going forward with the change that's going on in Parks and Rec and the broader message to City Council and to the city manager of the critical importance to provide resources to Parks and Recreation in the first place. And we don't want to be taking the money that we've worked for trees and say, well, we'll help to pay some of the labor cost for this. And I know in the end, this is all sort of fungible, but coming off a year in which we got $0 and we planted 23 trees because you were able to scratch and had money, I don't want this to be a year where we're planting fewer trees because we feel we don't have the resources to support them. So we have to pay people, pay towards to the personnel budget so that we can do these trees. I mean, that to me is not, again, I come back to, are you going to plant all of I understand, so you clarified that. So we don't have to really water till we get into the spring. But is there still a way to say, well, I'm going to hedge my bets a little and I'm going to plant half of those trees now in spring, and then I'm going to hold off on planting the second half? Or do we run out of time in the fiscal year to say I'm going to plant the second half so that we're just sort of hedging our bets that we're going to have an even more augmented staff at that point? And it may be more trouble than it's worth, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, we really, we do one planting cycle, and we do it, in the fall and winter. So like I said, they'll probably go in December, January. As we get closer to spring, if anything happens with the weather, it gets pushed back and pushed back. I guess the previous urban forester, he used to, for different reasons, would plant later and later in the year. And it got to be a problem with, trees going in where, they're pulling the bark off the trees, trying to get them planted and things like that, or trees don't get planted and become summertime and things like that. And I want to try to avoid that.
Mike, do you have money in your budget to oversee any of that planting, or to have somebody on your staff make sure that they're planting to, the standards that you have, asked them to agree to? Like, what's the quality control over their work?
Mm-hmm. So I will go and I check every tree that's planted before I approve the invoice for the project.
Do you see that after it's been planted, or do you see the process of the planting?
Yeah, I can't watch 160 trees be planted.
Right.
I do come and see, make sure they're the correct trees and correct sizes and correct locations, so they can get paid.
Yeah, because that can make a big difference in terms of how they, are either preparing the hole and or unwrapping the burlap, depending on, how the tree arrives, et cetera. It can make a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely can. Unfortunately, I just can't be everywhere.
Right. Maybe we should all volunteer. Is that what you're going to offer, Jacqueline?
So am I muted? No, I'm on. Oh, Mike, sign me up. I will babysit those trees. I would be happy to take whatever portion of trees we get in the ground. And I do it with the ones that we planted. It's just 10 little trees. I walk by them all the time. I'm happy to. I think that would be a legitimate role for the commission to assist you in that way. Because I totally get that that's a big number to keep an eye on.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that.
I mean, maybe the commission we could
Yep.
all consider that. And you could tell us what to look for. And
some of us would have to purchase longer hoses, but yes, we could.
oh, not so much water. I think just to check on. I mean, watering, I think would be a challenge, but
Yeah.
I think just alerting Mike to burn out to any of the issues might just, I'd be happy
Oh,
to
yeah,
help.
no, I mistook your point. That's a great point. I mean, so two things. One is that we have this list, so we might want to come back once spring comes and say, okay, we want to go follow up, or whenever Mike needs us to go look. Obviously, we can't sign off the way he does, but to check on them. And then I lost the second point. So, but anyway, that was a more important point, was that, yes, I think that we should. Oh, and also, Mike, I've said this to you before, but just to keep the commission apprised. So if we get to spring and you think we still have a labor crunch, and because what will happen is that we will eventually hear from citizens and residents that, as we have, not necessarily because the new trees, but there's dead trees in front of my office downtown. There are dead trees in front of my condo. And so it's sort of better for us to know ahead of time that, what issues you're having in terms of maintaining these trees next year. So if we get to April or May and you're still feeling a crunch, please share that with us, because we front the community, we face the community, and they come to us. On a positive note, we had an issue with, as I reported to the commission at the last meeting, I believe, or perhaps it was the last meeting, we had an issue of a number of residents and workers downtown raising issues of downtown trees around East High and East Jefferson. That was remediated. And at least what I heard was the trees that were dead or that needed to be removed had been removed. And that I actually got a follow-up from a person who had raised the issue and was saying thank you. Actually said somebody in city government heard me and actually called and left a lengthy message on my phone saying, this happened a lot quicker than I thought. It's nice to not see all of that deadness here. And then said, as any of us would have said, I wonder when the new trees are coming. So I haven't looked through the list, to be honest with you, tree by tree, but I think maybe a side conversation would be, does any of this like take into account any of the trees like around the Queen Charlotte Square condo or whatever? So I think if not, we probably might want to tweak the list a little bit more. In the interest of time, I think what we need to know from you is how much more, how many more adjustments to this list you want to, and given your timing, normally you would have final approval from us.
Sure.
Do you need that final approval tonight, or do you want a contingent approval, or do you want us just to approve the list and give you the leeway to make like whatever other changes you see fit? We don't want to wait till next month's meeting because it sounds like you need to put this forward.
No, I don't want to wait till next month's meeting. If the group would like to approve the list and then if we're gonna, I guess if the group would like to approve the list of the locations and then know that they will be ranked with based on the different priorities, or no, you said you wanted to go with last year's priorities. Yeah, I guess if the group is okay with the list as is, and I will go ahead and rank them based on last year's priorities.
I think a compromise too would be to say, if you get us this, if we approve tonight, but you're going to make some final changes, that perhaps split the difference and say, if you make any substantial changes to the list that we agree on you're going forward with, that you would just shoot it off to us in an email and say, 72 hours for any final comments. I need to bid these trees. That would give, I mean, frankly, I think most people's eyes sort of blur when it's a long list. So I think maybe, I don't know how the rest of the commission feels about that. In other words, you can go forward, but if there are any substantial changes or anything you need to tell us.
Yeah, that's fine. Works for me.
And then I guess my last question, which was my first question that I forgot from way back, was, can you just summarize to us in terms of, I know there are columns here, but can you just summarize to us in terms of like, what percentage of these are going to be large versus medium? I mean, are we going to be able to have those 150 trees really get some good sized trees in? And I didn't read through the whole table, but just a rough shot.
Yeah, I can't give you a percentage. I can tell you that I planted large shade trees everywhere I can. If there's a small shade tree, it's because it's in conflict with a building or overhead utility or something like that. So yeah, there's always an emphasis on large shade trees. I planted a couple of years ago in East McIntyre Park, some Quercus nigra, some water oak, and they've done really well. So I've added many more to this list. Other than that, it's sort of the same planting palette that I've used in the past.
Any other comments or questions? I think this is important because, I mean, this is really the heart of what we do in terms of one of our, the triad of our mission is planting. So I think it's really important to have had some discussion about this, even though.
Mike, you've had luck both with the Princeton and with the Jefferson.
Yeah, I've used them both. It's really just sort of availability from the nursery, but they both worked well.
Jeff in particular, but anyone on the Arbor Committee, I mean, in particular, if you want to follow up with Mike before he sends sort of a final list around and just give it a look, because I know there wasn't time to really go through the full committee structure again before Mike presented this. That's why we sort of took the time tonight to be a committee and talk about this. But, and I know you all are busy and have things, but if you would just, everybody puts an eye to the list, but those of you in the Arbor Committee put a sharper sort of final eye. If there's anything, like I wouldn't have known, Jeff, for example, that question you just raised. So that level of expertise and familiarity. I know Mike would like that too. I mean, this helps Mike. So if we could do that and then send him on his way before the next meeting on this process, that would be great.
Be happy to. The only other question I had was the yellow and green and what those represented. And if I missed that, my apologies.
No, that was just something for me. There were some that I had utilities marked, and I was waiting to evaluate. So that was just for me.
Okay.
Mike, I did not have much luck clearly defining right of way on some of the suggested trees. So would you mind communicating if some are just not feasible due to right of way issues? And then I'll just have that in my notes that not to recommend them again, or do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So-
Yeah, there were the ones, yeah, there was a right of way issue. They looked like good opportunities for tree planting, but they were on private property.
And,
So,
and
but
okay, as long as I know which ones, because I was just taking a stab. I was just being hopeful in some cases
Mhm.
that maybe there was a way we could squeeze them in. But if you just tell me which ones are off the list for right away.
Sure, I can do that.
So then the commission is essentially saying that we approve of this. There'll be some input and some exchange between now and when you finalize the list. I don't see an objection to that. I do think that with the process or what the work Jeff has done and what we'll continue to do, I think what we want to be doing is, and I know we've done some of this, but already thinking about next year's list and start filling in. So to everybody, I know most of you have done this, many of you have done this, but when you see things like you're thinking next year, we really should put some trees here. The ability to enter it and not just shoot Mike an email, the hundreds of emails he gets would be very helpful. And to that point, I know some of you have been in Microsoft Teams site. I think that Mike, when everybody comes on the commission, my understanding is that you give them access to the MS Teams site. I'm not sure if Jacqueline, that was your issue, but I want to make sure that everybody has access to that. It is a place to store this list. It is a place for committees to store their materials. All the major resources, the onboarding stuff, all of the long reports are all there. We've been talking about using that and for the past year and a half, and we've sort of slowly gotten into it, but I think we realize we need to get in the 21st century and use that a little bit more. It'll just be easier as a sharing tool. And that would be a place where obviously the list would live so that people could just go in and update it as they went along. Obviously, maybe making sure we did document control so we don't lose the original list, but I'm just thinking ahead on that. So if you have any questions about accessing MS Teams, you don't have the email with your access, let Mike know because he can, I think, send you a new email and sort of re-invite you. But I encourage you to use that as a resource. All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. We actually had more discussion about the whole mechanics and the process of planting this year than we have had in a while, so that was good. We have a half an hour left, and I want to update everybody on a couple of things. The annual report. So what was sent to you as a kind of a placeholder was last year's annual report, which was sent largely for the benefit of new members who've not been through that process before, just to see what our written report looks like to council. We do two. We do a written report, and then we do a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. The written report is, we're charged with giving a report of the previous fiscal year. So that's what that is. The report, the presentation made to council is a summary of that, but also an ask to council and sort of looking ahead. So they're two different things, but we're required to do the written report. The written report is, you've already seen a number of the charts and the graphs that we looked at last time. You've seen tonight's, which was just a tweak to show the current budget. That's those in the copy that I sent you, that's last year's report, but those just get dropped in and then we provide some narrative. We look at trends and statistics. Frankly, since we really didn't do very much planting, those numbers aren't going to change very much. So I think the strategy will be, and I will send a draft out to you after this meeting sometime in the next week or so, that the goal will be to update that, but to focus more, not spend as much time tweaking that too much, but to focus more on the presentation, which will be made hopefully in December, because that looks forward and that actually raises all of the issues we want to raise and present to council. So again, that was for some of you, that was for your edification to see that. We are, as I said earlier, we're in a position to actually weigh in on some critical decisions that are going to be made for Parks and Rec. So after the last meeting, we appreciated having Sam Sanders here, the new deputy city manager who's here. We followed up with him to express just some general concerns about priorities, citywide priorities towards Parks and Rec, both in terms of staffing, leadership, and also resources that go beyond just what we think of as our ask every year to council for planting trees. As long as I've been on the commission, we really haven't had this sort of broader conversation. I think it's important. So we reached out to Sam, and again, because we're taking advantage of an opportunity to do this, we reached out to Sam about our inclusion in the process for interviewing candidates for leadership. So this time it is obviously a new parks director, a deputy director, and I guess the position right now that was John Mann's, Mike, was landscape supervisor.
Yes, that's
Is
correct.
that the correct classification?
Mhm.
So we reached out to Sam first for a sit down with him. He's a very busy man. Obviously, he's getting to know the lay of the land. So at some point, hopefully in the next few weeks, commission leadership will sit down with him to go into sort of more detail about some of the concerns we have and just ways in which we think we can actually be helpful, especially in advocating to city council. But more immediate is replacing leadership. And my understanding is that from things you, Mike, have said and Todd said before he left us, and probably even I think Sam said at the last meeting, is there is a sense of urgency, even though we have good people in place acting, there's a sense of urgency, of importance, urgency is a strong word, to fill those positions. So that is our first concern. And so Sam did say that he'd like to have us, he'd like to include us in the interview process. Now, what we suggested was when it gets to the point of final candidates or whatever, was there a way in which we could weigh in or provide suggestions and recommendations? And so what he asked yesterday, he emailed me and asked yesterday that we develop, we won't do this here this evening, but we will develop for him some questions that they might use in the interview process, and whether those questions are the extent of our participation or not, or we still are thinking about that. So there are a lot of pieces here. So there's that, and so we appreciate, and I want to thank Sam for that. We appreciate that we're going to have an opportunity to do that in a formal way, in a structured way. The other part of this is that Peggy conducted, she had an exit interview with Todd Brown, who, as you know, was here last time for his last meeting as Parks Director. His last day, I think, was last Friday. And I wish she were here to talk about it, but they had a good conversation and he had some insight. And there was a meeting of the minds in terms of what we should be thinking about this new leadership that's coming in. And it ties into things we were talking about earlier tonight, to comments that Mark made about the messaging that's coming from council candidates, messaging that we have tried to change over the years in terms of the importance and all of the reasons why we need to think of green infrastructure. Reaching back, for a number of you will remember that the previous Parks Director, Brian Daly, when the subject of our urban forest plan, which is, we all agree, is woefully out of date, that we actually consider a broader natural resources plan. And so the idea was that we would combine with other allied people in the city and develop a natural resources plan. So that idea sat out there. Brian left. We didn't pursue it, nor did we update the forestry, the urban forestry plan. And then, of course, we had the surprise of the pandemic. So this has been building really in terms of how we sort of define what we're doing, not just as the commission, but how the city looks at this broader picture of which trees are a very important component. But as we know, natural environment is a lot more than trees. And so the conversation that, and Todd said that we could share this part of the conversation he had with Peggy. The conversation was that from his perspective, because he had experience before he came to Charlottesville with this thing, we really need to be thinking about stressing for ourselves and within Parks and Rec, the importance of natural resources and the importance of an understanding and a commitment to natural resources from the top of leadership all the way through. I don't want to say down to Mike, but through the entire department. And obviously that would differ from looking at the criteria and the qualifications of a director versus a landscape supervisor. And by the way, Todd did recommend that that position, landscape supervisor, really should be, we've tried to get away from that word landscape, and because any of the steering committees for road projects and all that, that's just an old term that really doesn't really apply to green infrastructure. Todd's suggestion was that we advocate, and we generally agree that we advocate that position at least have a reclassification, but that when you get down to that level, and certainly to Mike's level, that Parks, which is a very large department, which has dual missions really, but that there be at least a strong support for natural resources. Not that there hasn't been in the past, but that this be articulated, that the commission take a position on this and articulate, and that one way to do this is through the hiring process. So again, all of this is sort of coming together, and we have an opportunity to be involved in this. And I think a number of us think this is important, but before going forward, obviously, it's good to have a conversation with the commission, because this is not just leadership or 3 or 4 people on the commission, but this should be, we should have an idea, a consensus that this is what we want to do. I mean, certainly being involved in the hiring process is something that offered the opportunity, we should be involved. But it's bigger than that. It's sort of redefining what the mission is. And again, I wish Peggy were here. I think she could add to that. But are there any sort of, that's a lot to throw at the commission, but are there any sort of thoughts or comments or reflections or differences or hesitations about pursuing that? I see Jane.
No, I think those are excellent ideas. I like the idea of broadening it to natural resources plan, and somehow linking it to this mysterious climate action plan that is somehow mysteriously being developed, but is kind of, I can't get a fix on it and who's doing it and how fast it's moving.
So that goes to the point, yeah, thank you. That goes to the point that, and this was raised in our report to council, presentation to council back in January, that one of the concerns that the commission has long had is that when we think of it in terms of natural resources, sustainability, climate change, all of those things, we have that sort of, not scattered, but it's in departments and divisions other than Parks and Rec. And in some cases, it's nobody's fault, but in some cases people are working on something and others are not alerted to it, or efforts are happening in different places. And so it was Todd's suggestion, and again, this is nothing new to many of us who've been on the commission for a while and have said this to council as well, that there needs to be better coordination, interdepartmental coordination. And I think, and Mike, you may correct me in this, but I think Brian Daly's idea of creating and crafting a natural resources plan would actually be one way in tying this together, because it goes beyond just the tree commission, right? So it involves sustainability, which I think sits in public works. And then it should involve a more robust component, which we advocated for to council back in January, that Mike alone cannot be the person who is watching for anything that's written into site plans once things go toward development. So we've actually advocated, which some communities have, a stronger tree person presence within NDS itself, regardless of not having that position, because they're already charged with a lot of other things to watch out for. And Mike obviously is over in Parks and Rec and has his own, charge, which has grown considerably in the last year. We need some coordination. And so I think the direction of this is here's an opportunity, especially within the change in leadership in parks, to sort of redefine. And perhaps this would help to alleviate that concern. So Gene, we wouldn't feel like there's this effort going off, or there's this heat island study, and where do these things come together? Because it's a big effort, and the tree commission alone can't do it.
Right. And I think another aspect of it is that a lot of cities are making their climate action plans equity driven or centered. And and I don't know where that is in the city government in Charlottesville, but it seems to me that that has to be a working component that has to all of the other planning.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we've been stressing that, but it's not just the tree commission in the city that is aware of that and alert to that. So what I would propose is that, since I did tell Sam that we would be back to him shortly, is a few of us, we've got some questions. I've previewed some of the issues, some of the things we want to raise. And so I think what we'll do is come up with some additional questions, hopefully be able to circulate it to everybody on the commission. I did tell Sam that we try to get him some questions by the end of the week. So today's Tuesday. We may start with some higher level questions. Not all of this would come up in an interview process. Anyhow, it would be more conversation with city administration and also reporting to city council. Again, all of this ties together. So to step back and look at the presentation that we're going to be making to council in December, this would also feed into that presentation, right? So if there's any recommendations that we want to make or any messaging to council, this is our opportunity to do so. I think we'll, in that presentation too, my strategy would be to spend, because it's 10 minutes. I think I used 11 last time, but I actually rehearsed my presentation, which I don't normally do, so I wouldn't go too far over the limit. A little secret, when you're home on Zoom, you kind of get away with a minute or two more because you don't have people staring at you all around. I want to spend less time recapping, since there's not a lot to recap, and more time messaging forward in this presentation. In the amount of time that we have, I'd like to spend 7 minutes talking about current needs and what we see going forward, and just basically saying, you already saw a written report. Here are 4 bullet points. Last time, I think it was, 7 and 3 the other way around. So that would be the strategy on that presentation. Other comments or questions? Sorry, it's so wordy this evening, but there are a lot of just ideas up there. All right, Mike, you and I have some quick in the last 15 minutes of some important updating to do. I asked you if you would follow up on the state of that mall tree that had been improperly pruned by a private party.
Yeah, so there's nothing new to report besides that the tree has not been cut further. So we still, need to get together what is going to be our plan for remediation or consequence. And I don't know what that looks like, meeting with the city attorney's office or what the next course of action is.
We had a short turnaround time between meetings, so we didn't get to that. Also, again, all these things tie together. We have a lot of turnover in leadership, so my goal was to make sure that you were watching the tree so nothing further would happen. And also, I'll say this, I said it last month, I'll say it at the second meeting that's being held publicly, that nothing further should happen to that tree without you being alerted in advance as the city arborist that some action is contemplated, at which point then we would entrust you to alert us that there's some movement. But I think as long as there's no movement on that tree, and that tree does not serve as a precedent to other property owners that this can be done, that we're fine for now, and we can follow up in a sort of more constructive way. I think basically, if the only thing we solve long-term is that there is a process or a procedure that you are involved with, and that you are either getting our contractor in to do the tree, or you're supervising the work that day, or somebody in your department. That has got to be written into the process so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. But that conversation, as you say, is with others. So just keep your eye on it for us. The second mall issue, one that you and I discovered last week, this is another troubling issue that, again, is a process and communication thing, but I'm personally not pleased about it because I've raised it 4 meetings in a row, and you did your best, but it happened anyway. So would you please apprise the commission?
Sure. So we had talked about last month and previously about the code building planter, about an opportunity for the commission to provide input. And the planter that was going on the mall extended in front of the code building. And it has been planted with willow oaks, and they appear to be dead. They're brown. So we were not happy about that. I emailed the city planner, who then emailed the developer. And I guess the trees are under warranty. They're saying that, they're not dead and they're not going to be replaced at this time, but if in the spring, if they don't leaf out, they will be replaced. So again, multiple issues, and we were not asked for feedback.
So I'm sorry, this is the second meeting in a row that I have to sort of raise high dudgeon about things, but it's not a courtesy to either include the city arborist or the city tree commission in decisions that are made about city trees. I don't think we should have to state that, but I am for the public and for everybody who's listening. It's not a courtesy. When you raised this, and I want to say it was back as far back as May or June, it was spring. And I said to you each time, make sure we don't get surprised. And I know you were diligent and all that. Somehow this slipped in, it happened. But these are trees, these are city trees. And as we discussed about the other incident, if we're not watching over the city trees on the mall, which are some of the most, if not the most prominent trees in the city that are enjoyed by a huge number of people, then what are we watching? A little history, and Mike probably correct me on this, but my recollection is that when this project was approved and we knew that obviously construction affects trees and it was going to affect, but that after the fact, there was a lot more that was taken out than at least the commission was led to think. So we're already starting with a situation where the commission was not kept abreast, and then it came as a surprise. And that is why I felt so strongly about when it came time to make a decision about what happened there, that is a decision that has to be made by the city. That includes you and that includes the commission. Others may think differently, but again, I feel strongly about this. And so if this is a process issue and a procedure issue, I know it's done, the trees are in there. It also does reflect badly on the city that people are going to be walking by dead trees for months. I think frankly, that's unacceptable. And I don't know at this point, but I think that we need to somehow come back and take control of that process. Because this is not just about that planter, it's about all of those trees on the mall. So I've said my piece. Again, I'm sorry, it's second meeting in a row that I feel strongly about this, but I don't know if anybody else, I don't want to be the only voice here. I don't know if anybody else has comments or thoughts or any disagreement on this. I don't see anybody shaking their heads that they disagree. So I think we just as a commission agree that, and I want to say this, another way I want to say this publicly is that we're backing up the city arborist on this. So again, if there are breaks in the process of procedures somewhere in both these cases within government, and this is cutting the arborist out, then we're advocating for that not to happen. We talk about resources in parks. We talk about, even without a pandemic, we talk about everything that one city arborist has to do. The last thing we have to do is always spending our time as a commissioner, the arborist, wondering when are we going to get surprised next about something. So again, that's the commission's desire that this be addressed somehow.
I think some of the issues that come up with site plan review and the process, they have a new director, James, who is still, he's been with the city for a few weeks now, I believe. But I think that he would benefit from hearing about some of these issues that sort of they come up in the holes in the site plan review process. And this obviously is an example. I think he might benefit from hearing that from the commission.
Yes. And I say everything in the spirit of cooperation and working. This is not some power trip where the commission is, wants to, because we know that happens. That's not what this is about. This goes to the heart of what the commission was established to do. And I will report this back to council. This will be part of our report, that we had some issues come up and that we want to make sure that, again, I'm not suggesting, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying there's a breakdown here and we want to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't go forward. And we want to make sure that you have the ability to weigh in when you need to weigh in and to alert us when we need to be alerted to things before they happen. And so I want that message to get out.
Brian, just one comment or question. I don't really know the plan for the code building. Is this planter part of a new public landscape that is an extension of West Main Street, or is it on the mall? Like,
it's on the mall extended. It's in the public right of way.
Okay.
So the input that was the public process as far as the tree commission was concerned with this planter that previously had trees in it. I think 2 years ago, Greg Bleem came to the tree commission and he had said, we have to take out this planter to stage equipment and we're going to rebuild it. We don't know what it's going to look like, as far as shape and dimensions and things. And, but it was everything was all on the table, and it was, some consideration for Vinegar Hill Park and doing different things in that location. And then it was, we'll come back and for the public process part, and that never happened.
Thank you.
I believe actually there were 2 planters there. So I don't know if all that, and my understanding was that they weren't going to come back and sort of replant quite as much as had been planted in that area. We're talking between the code building and the Omni. So there used to be considerable green foliage there. My understanding was that there was going to be reduced amount of planting after this whole project. So am I correct about that, Mike, from what you know?
It appears that way. The other smaller terrace planter, there was a utility conflict. So it looks like there's ground cover in it now.
Okay. Well, again, I'm just advocating for the public's trees, and the public needs to have a say on this. And so if the breakdown in process was in the planning process, if everybody thought everybody had signed off on this, if the developer thought, it didn't happen to where the people who are actually charged by the council with advising them and looking out for the public trees are not involved, then I think by any definition, that's a breakdown in process. So yes, I would be happy, and probably some other members of the commission, but certainly I would be happy to have a conversation with anybody about how we can constructively work going forward. And if there are new folks, that's great. I just think we need to make this clear. We may be going a few minutes over. I apologize again, but there are a few other things. Mike, there are two budget issues. You usually review the operating budget request. I know this is a simple, quick one, but just so that it's on the record, would you take us through that?
So we will be putting forward, again, the same operating budget of $218,000. So this is for tree care. This is printing, storm damage removal, stump grinding, emerald ash borer treatments, and Dutch elm treatments. So that's pretty standard. That's what we put forward in the past. With the CIP, we'll be putting forward two budget requests for urban forestry, and they are $100,000 for tree planting to try to plant the 200 trees for the goal of the tree commission. And then the other budget request is $105,000 for emerald ash borer affected trees for removal. And that's a 5-year request. So that's what we will be putting forward.
And as we discussed last time, the messaging on that and the notes on that second, especially the emerald ash borer, needs to be clear about the urgency. And sort of a reminder of the history of how we haven't really funded that. So I asked you this last meeting, just so the commission kept abreast in terms of the process, the CIP process. What are the milestones? Like, what do we, in terms of like writing the narrative or reviewing whatever narrative you've written, is that something we're going to do between now and the next meeting, or are we going to, do we have next meeting to finalize that?
I have to get something to Vic, a draft tomorrow. So I don't know if we'll have time to do that. I was going to take essentially the same template that we submitted last year for both requests. I have to provide the justification for why we're asking for $100,000. And then I have to provide the additional justification, which I provided earlier this year in May, I think, about the emerald ash borer plan, how we came up with 105,000. Because that's a piece that we did not have last year for the budget request. So they said, well, how much do you really need? So now we have something that's defendable.
So your deadline of tomorrow is a draft, is within the department. It's not.
Correct.
Is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity to weigh in on that after tomorrow, or how late tomorrow?
We should have time. I should be able to take to the next meeting in November, bring it back, and then the planning commission, the first meeting is November 16th. So there's sometimes at those meetings, there's opportunity for public input.
Well, I want to be sure that so I think the steps should be, if you need to take the next step and move the draft, would you just email it to me in the morning? So
Sure.
I see the updates with the numbers. Then I think we should be weighing in on it and strengthening the message as much as possible. Remember, you did that report on emerald ash borer with the different scenarios, and I'm not sure how we can reference that because that's a lot of detail in there, but we spent time and we hashed that through back in the spring. So I think that's important to include somehow or reference and get that in. And so that when we come to our meeting in November, we pretty much have this done and we don't have to talk about it and send it off sort of a little still uncertain. It's just the messaging is just really important. It goes again with the conversations we're going to have with the change in leadership, with going to council. I want to make sure that we're all in agreement that we're making the strongest possible case for both these things, but especially for the emerald ash borer, because that's a critical need. Now, I know this is not the year we want to jump our number up for planting, but I know we've had this conversation before, and at some point, I know this is an increase, so I appreciate that. But I mean, I think we need to be thinking that and preparing that there will be increases in future asks, because again, we're playing so much catch up on, especially on the planting. We would be delighted to receive $100,000 this year with the caveat that you have potentially next year, you have issues, so staff. But.
So I think if we put these two CIP requests forward, I think the question inevitably will be from somewhere that, you know, what if you could take some from the planting CIP money and use it towards emerald ash borer if they're not going to give both or something like that. So we don't need an answer tonight, it's just something to think about.
Yeah. Well, and I sort of know what my answer is, but yes, I agree. We are grateful for what we get. We're willing to work, but we've gotten $0 on emerald ash borer. And we've got a problem facing us. Again, for new members, this was priced out to deal with the city's emerald ash trees was priced out, well, it was north of 550,000, right?
522, I think.
Okay, 520, yeah. So we got to start somewhere with that money. So far it's $0. And we know that if you have a bad year, it's going to come out of your budget and it's going to mean that it's going to impact other work. So I think that's the messaging that we need to really hit home on. So for the commission's benefit, then that's something that you and I will work on moving forward to and get to a point somewhere in enough advance of the next meeting that we can send what we think is a really solid draft with our comments, with the narrative, so the commission can review. So when we come back next month, we're making a decision and not having to spend a lot of time on it. Wall RFP.
Oh.
No, I was going to say that's on me because again, we're just sitting on that. There's just too much transition in the department. And even if we had a mall RFP completed and all that, there are a lot more people to weigh in than Mike. So that is kind of a victim of the times. So we're going to punt that. We've been punting it. We're going to continue to punt it another month unless you have something else to say about that, Mike.
No.
The last, the tree nomination packet. There was some concern between meetings that we hadn't covered some trees, and so we would need to discuss the trees again, tree nomination packets. And just for the benefit of everybody while we're here, can you and I have talked about this, Mike, can you just let the commission know where that packet stands?
Sure. All the trees that were nominated are in the arborist report. So I might go back and number them differently to make it clearer. But in the arborist report, it has a description of the tree and its location and which street it's on. And then I may go back and create a different map before it goes to council.
So there's some confusion that the Second Street trees had not been included, but they are. Your assessment is in there for those trees as well.
Correct.
So then my portion of this, the commission's portion of this is to do the cover letter, which is on me to draft and send out to the commission. So there'll at least be 2 items, possibly 3 with the planting list. So just a heads up to commissioners between now and the next meeting. Hopefully in the next week or 10 days so that we're not rushing going into the next meeting. I'm going to ask you this, Mike, publicly, just because this was raised from a resident. Do we have anything more we can report on the situation on Avon Street? Do we know any more about that project that was emailed to us that I followed up with you on?
On Avon Street?
Okay, you and I can take it sidebar. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we need to get back to the resident, but this is an issue where this is actually a planning issue and this could impact trees and we don't know enough. And so, but I don't want to let it drop. So I just want to circle around on that.
Brian, can I interrupt you? I've got to go. And,
Yeah.
And I just want to ask the tree commissioners to please let me know of any issues you see in the comp plan proposal that is out there. I sent you all an email with the Seville plans together link for getting to the drafts. And I have a meeting Thursday afternoon with the consultants to bring forth any questions I have. There's a big push on among the leadership to try and get a draft approved next Tuesday night at the Planning Commission meeting a week from today. So please bring forward any questions, any issues, any concerns you have. I suspect the main chapters you'd be interested in are the first, which is the land use and urban form, the fourth, which is the environment and climate, and the sixth, which is community services and infrastructure. So please let me know, preferably before Thursday afternoon. But we're coming down to the wire. I'm sorry to do this, Brian, but I do need to
No,
go.
we've run late again. Sorry. Thanks, Jody.
Sure.
Could I just charge? I know Codes is busy. Could I, since Codes has had a look at the comp plan and all that, could you be the gatekeeper for this? Or, I mean, do you want Jody? I mean, everybody just email Jody individually, or do we want to have at this point, I guess?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, chapters 1, 4, and 6. So that's a little bit of short-term homework for everybody. This goes under our role as advocacy, obviously, so I think we should. We should get that to Jody. A related issue, which
And thank
Vicky
you all
raised-
very much, and good night.
Thank you. Good night. A related issue that Vicky had raised in emails to the codes people, and that is legislating for the agenda, for the state's agenda in any way that it obviously impacts on trees, the environment, and all that. So I think that's something that codes could look at as a group and maybe figure out. I don't think it's imminent, but there is a schedule. So I would encourage that. I don't believe we've done that before, but I think that, again, it's another way for us to advocate. And I guess that goes up through council. So maybe if codes wants to discuss, if a couple of you want to discuss and come up with ideas, and I don't know if we have time to bring it back to the commission next month, but we could certainly take this sidebar and do it that way. We are kind of running out of time this year, and we have a lot of things on our plate, but I do think that's another way in which we can weigh in. All right, with apologies to everybody, it is now almost 10 after. I do want to make a call for any, I don't see anybody from the public, but I don't have the full view. Is there any public comments or questions before we adjourn?
One quick thing, just want to let everyone know the canopy study has been, RFQ has been awarded, and we have a kickoff meeting tomorrow. So it's moving forward, and we hope to have it done by December 1st.
December 1st is a good deadline because we want anything we can add specifically from that into the report to council. I'm not sure if public is being monitored, but I'm not hearing that there are any comments or questions from the public. Another long meeting. I ask if any commissioners have anything that we didn't discuss, if that's at all possible, that we didn't touch on during this meeting. I don't see anything. All right, well then I feel comfortable adjourning the meeting at 10 after 7.
Thanks.
Thank you all
Bye.
thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Brian.
you.
Good night, all.
You too.
Good night.
Yeah.